Yeah, you have your models to make forecast. Can you explain us your main model, ACM?
Basically, it's really the business cycle. What is in there is everything. You can't extract climate, war, etc. I mean, I've published a lot on it. It goes back to, I've tested it back to 6,000 BC even, and published all the research on this. And there have been many different theories over the years. Some, many of them touch on it to some degree, but it's what you believe. And this is why Keynesian economics is not working. This idea, it's the same as communism in a way, that they reduce us down to just, drones. And, if we raise interest rates, they'll stop buying. If they lower interest rates, they'll stimulate. When Keynes came up with those ideas in the 1930s, the U.S. had a balanced budget. That's no longer the case. So a central bank raises interest rates, and it hurts government more than the private sector, because the government has never paid off the debt. U.S., we're still paying interest on World War I debt. This is part of the socialistic problem. You saw, China and Russia collapse because communism is inefficient. Back when China was communism was failing, I was called in, and I got a front row seat to see how it actually worked. I went to this facility there in Beijing, and they were asking me, I was impressed that they were monitoring everything, but they weren't interfering. And they wanted to know, there literally were 249 varieties of tea in China. I never knew there were that many. And they were tracking them all. And they wanted to know why this one tea, for example, was selling for like $1 here and $5 someplace else. And I said, well, where does it come from? I said, here. I said, well, first you have transportation costs. And was like, oh, yeah, okay. And I said, then somebody will pay more for one because they like this one better than that. And I was like almost teaching them, like kindergarten, economics. And under communism, if it was €1 here and it cost €10 to get it someplace else, they still had to sell it for €1. That's why it was so inefficient. It just, communism fell all by itself. It didn't take a war to do it. It's not sustainable. And that's what the West is going through. We are, it's a late version of communism in a way, the socialistic idea. And they borrow every single year to bribe the people to vote. But they never pay anything off. Eventually, that comes crashing down. There's nobody in history that has ever been able to do this. And look, I was even called in by the Swiss central bank when they had the peg with the euro and the Swiss. And I warned them. I said, look, my model says this is going to break. And they said, no, we think we can hold it. And I said, look, I've been called into everything. Not a single country's ever been able to do this. The peg broke. I think they named me forecaster of the year for that. But it's just, they always think they have the power to control, and they do not. You cannot go against the basic business cycle. And that's what that model really is about. And it's confidence. And this is what they don't understand. We've done studies plotting the stock market with interest rates. It has never peaked twice in history with the same level. Why? Because if you think the stock market will double next year, you'll pay 20%. But if you don't think it's going to go up 1%, you won't borrow at 1%. So it's expectations, confidence. That's why I call it the economic confidence model. If you don't believe in the future, you're not going to invest. That's why the ECB went negative in 2014 and it still didn't work. People just took their money out of the bank and put cash in safes at home. So they don't understand humanity. And they just look at us as a zero-sum game and think that they can manipulate us to do whatever they want. And it just does not work.